Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into something absolutely crucial. We are unpacking a high-stakes constitutional tug-of-war over literally the bedrock of our democracy, our fundamental voting rights. At the very center of this story is the 2025 Bihar election, and it's a legal battle that asks some incredibly tough questions. Mainly, how do we balance the mechanics of running a massive election with protecting the rights of the individual voter?
Picture this scenario for a second. You're an eligible voter, right? You've participated in elections before, done your civic duty, but suddenly an administrative rule changes. Boom. A highly compressed paperwork deadline is dropped on you, and if you can't navigate that bureaucracy in time, you are stripped of your constitutional right to vote. I mean, how would that feel? That deeply personal, visceral fear of just losing your voice is exactly the scenario at the heart of the legal battle we're looking at today. It instantly shows us the massive stakes involved when administrative efficiency collides head-on with democratic participation.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. First, the Bihar election controversy. Second, the power of the Election Commission. Third, protecting the right to vote. Fourth, the Court's Balancing Act. And finally, number 5, the final verdict.
All right, starting with part 1, the Bihar election controversy.
So this is the real-world event that triggered this massive clash and sent shockwaves through the whole electoral system. Basically, ahead of the 2025 Assembly elections, the Election Commission rolled out a Special Intensive Revision, or SIR, of the electoral rolls in Bihar. Now, usually ahead of these elections, there's a much lighter, simpler summary revision process. But this SIR, it aggressively departed from that norm. It required electors to file completely fresh enumeration forms along with supporting documentation, all on a highly compressed timeline. We all know that sinking dread of a sudden paperwork deadline from, the DMV or the tax office. Now imagine that mechanic applied to your constitutional right to vote. You can immediately see how this sudden, intensive requirement just created widespread anxiety among voters who were frantically trying to secure their spot on the roll.
Moving to part 2, power of the Election Commission. To really understand the heavyweights in this story, we have to look at Article 324 of the Constitution. This is what makes the Election Commission a fully independent constitutional body. It gives them the ultimate authority, the superintendence, direction, and control over all elections. And crucially, that power explicitly includes the preparation of the electoral rolls. Because of this massive mandate, the Commission is owed a substantial amount of deference. They are the experts, and honestly, the law trusts their judgment on how to run a fair and accurate election.
And alongside the Constitution, we've got Section 21 of the Representation of the People Act 1950. This statute gives the Commission the explicit, specific legal mandate to actually revise those electoral rolls. So, when the Commission decided to implement that special, intensive revision in Bihar, they weren't just making things up on the fly. They were exercising their legal mandate and relying on their institutional expertise to figure out the best way to maintain accurate voter lists. From their perspective, it makes total sense. They have this colossal, logistical mandate to uphold.
Which brings us to part 3, protecting the right to vote.
But, an election isn't just about the administrators running the show. It is fundamentally about the citizens. While the right to vote is technically a statutory right rather than a named fundamental right, it is deeply intertwined with our constitutional guarantees. Take Article 14, which guarantees equality before the law. If an electoral process, like a crazy compressed paperwork revision, arbitrarily excludes eligible citizens from voting, it directly implicates this article. I mean, you literally cannot have equality if the state acts arbitrarily to silence an entire segment of the voting population.
And honestly, it goes even deeper than that. Article 21 protects personal liberty and dignity. The courts recognize the absolute centrality of voting to meaningful democratic citizenship. Being able to cast your ballot is a fundamental dignity. So when you are arbitrarily excluded from the electoral roll, it isn't just a minor paperwork glitch. It's an attack on the dignity dimension protected by Article 21. This is exactly why this issue matters so deeply to the individual voter, and why the stakes in Bihar were just sky high.
Now for the courtroom drama. Part 4, the Court's Balancing Act.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the clear head-to-head conflict. You've got a powerful constitutional body trying to clean up its voter lists versus citizens terrified of losing their right to vote. On the left, the petitioners make a really compelling case. Conducting an intensive revision in a tiny window right before an election structurally increases the risk of wrongful exclusion. They argued, hey, the burden of proving continued eligibility shouldn't fall on citizens who are already legally enrolled. But on the right side, we have the Election Commission, and their administrative reality is equally valid. They argue that periodic, intensive revision is absolutely necessary to remove ineligible, duplicate, or deceased entries. And as for the timing, well, with India's near-continuous election calendar, timing this kind of exercise around an election is practically unavoidable.
So, faced with these two incredibly powerful arguments, the court drew heavily on the principles of natural justice to mandate a procedural safety net. They basically laid out three crucial steps. First, the commission must widen the acceptable identity documents. Second, any excluded electors have to be published on a list, along with the stated reasons for their exclusion. And third, there has to be a period to allow for claims and objections before that roll is finalized.
Let's just take that first step, expanding the document list. And this brilliantly illustrates the court's highly practical approach to constitutional law. The court realized that an unduly narrow list of identity documents could act as a massive practical barrier. It could literally exclude citizens whose eligibility was never actually in doubt simply because they lacked one specific piece of paper. So, applying the non-arbitrariness standard of Article 14, the court directed the Commission to widen the list to include common everyday documents like Aadhaar, the EPIC voter card, and ration cards.
Finally, Part 5, the final verdict.
The legal reasoning here really hinged on this core premise. Core policy discretion under Article 324 retains a wide margin of deference, but the procedural architecture surrounding its exercise remains fully subject to Article 14. So the crucial point is this. The court utilized a beautifully calibrated model of review. They officially upheld the special intensive revision as constitutional. They basically ruled that choosing an intensive revision over a summary one isn't in and of itself disproportionate or excessive. The Commission absolutely keeps its independence to make that policy choice. But, and this is the massive but, the execution, the actual procedural architecture of how they carry it out on the ground, must strictly pass the fairness test of Article 14.
The big takeaway here is this delicate balancing act. The court recognized that executive discretion is absolutely reviewable for arbitrariness, especially where something as vital as the right to vote is at stake. The final outcome preserves the institutional independence of the Election Commission to do its job, while ensuring that this power is not exercised at the cost of the very franchise it exists to protect. It's a vital balance between institutional power and individual dignity.
Which leaves us with this final overarching thought to chew on. The tension we saw in Bihar, it isn't going anywhere. How should democracies balance the efficiency of their elections with the dignity of their voters? It's a complex, ongoing, mechanical challenge for literally any free society. I really hope this explainer helped clarify exactly how the scales of justice tip in these high-stakes scenarios. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating source material, and as always, keep questioning the systems that protect your rights.